All right, so this is the 2024 Razer Blade 14. It's Razer's latest iteration, featuring the new updated Ryzen 9 8945HS CPU. And visually, it remains similar to the 2023 model, with the same sleek CNC milled aluminum chassis, sporting a matte black finish. But y'all aware of how that elegance comes at a cost of being a complete fingerprint magnet? I mean, look, you could tell. This thing, it requires frequent cleanups. Now, we really wanted to see if the new Ryzen 8000 series CPUs bring any power efficiency gains to the table compared to the 7000 series from last year. So we'll be talking about that stuff very shortly. But also, you know, with the new G14 in the market, is this thing still as competitive? In fact, is it way faster compared to the G14? We're gonna be talking about all that performance stuff later in the video, but first, a quick word from today's video sponsor.
The new Tower 300, definitely a unique looking case with a 3-piece panoramic front view, made specifically for micro ATX motherboards with insane hardware support, like a 420mm rad fits on the side of the enclosure with this easily removable fan bracket. My 4-slot GPU fits in no problem with breathing room all around, fully dust protected on all sides too. The optional LCD screen is super fun, and the lay flat mode brings the Tower 300 into a whole new universe. Definitely explore the color options too, all linked below.
All right, so build quality has always been the Blade's forte, with a robust hinge that feels durable. Comparing to the new ROG Zephyrus G14, I would say that the Blade 14 is a bit sturdier, but the G14 is slightly smaller and lighter. Needless to say, I'm actually happy to see some competition in the build quality department for these 14-inch gaming laptops. I mean, Asus definitely stepped up the game with the G14. Now, about pricing. Razer did lower the base RTX 4060 SKU by $200 compared to the 2023 model, which is pretty generous, but the 4070 SKU is about the same price with the exception of twice the memory. You're not getting any 4080 or 4090 GPUs. Those are reserved for the Blade 16 and Blade 18 models. This thing also comes in Mercury White, but yeah, compared to the G14, this thing is hella expensive. But we all saw that coming because it is a Razer laptop, and so you're gonna end up paying the Razer price. Now I'm gonna switch to a little bit of a rant mode here because I've gotta say, I was expecting something different with Razer's design IDs for their Blade lineup this year. I mean, this is their 4th generation Blade 14, and honestly, it's starting to look a bit dated. I'm not sure if you guys agree with me on this, but yeah, I was hoping for them to address some of the pet peeves, or at least some of my pet peeves with these laptops. First off, the power adapter. It's the same old 230-watt brick that comes with my worst nightmare, and that's these braided cables with the 90-degree connector. I'm okay with the thickness since it requires power for the components inside, but because it's a reversible port, you might actually accidentally block the USB port next to it if you plug it the other way. The braiding also doesn't maintain its integrity for that long. It can begin to break and even cause kinks if not properly cared for. I mean, you can go to Reddit and see people complain about that stuff. Then there is the keyboard setup. Now, don't get me wrong, chroma lighting looks amazing. It's arguably one of the best lighting systems that you can find for a gaming laptop. However, I have to be honest, the keys themselves just don't quite measure up to the competition. I mean, the switches feel shallow and just don't provide enough feedback. I prefer the G14 over the Blade 14. I'll take this keyboard over that all day, any day. It feels like Razer's using the same recipe over and over again. I appreciate the low profile characteristics, and it gets the job done for productivity and gaming and all that kind of stuff. But I also found that the keycaps were slightly smaller compared to the Blade 16. It just would have been nice if Razer kept it consistent across the board. I also noticed that Razer implemented a few shortcuts within the keyboard to change the refresh rate, disable the trackpad, and cycle between different performance modes when you hit the function key. But yeah, if you've owned a Razer Blade laptop, are you happy or satisfied with the keyboard performance? Is it still holding up? Or are you expecting, or at least were you expecting more with the newer model? Comment down below. I do love the trackpad. It is the same glass surface and it's pretty awesome for navigating through windows. The I/O setup remains the same as well. You get power in, USB Type-A 3.2 Gen 2, audio jack, and a USB 4 port. This is actually pretty neat since you can use Thunderbolt docks, which never used to be a thing with AMD laptops, but now you can. Switching over to the right-hand side, you get Kensington lock, HDMI 2.1, another USB Type-A port, and a USB 4 Type-C port. So this is what the new webcam looks like on the new Razer Blade 14. Now, the sensor is exactly the same compared to the 2023 model, but again, they had to find a way to market the new AI features built into the Ryzen CPU. So one of them is actually working with some of the features built into Windows Studio effects. So the first one is automatic framing, which essentially just masks your face, and then it just follows you. That's exactly what it does. Now it's going to zoom into my face, but I'm going to come back so that it's lined up appropriately. And then we have background effects. So there's two options. There's portrait blur, which is my preferred setting, but there's standard blur if you want something a little even more aggressive. And there's eye contact. Now this essentially masks your eyes, and then it pretends to look at the webcam even though I'm just looking at the screen. And it doesn't work all the time. Right now I'm looking at the screen. I'm not sure if it's actually working with this recording, but some of the times when I've tested it doesn't really work that much. The microphone quality is pretty good, should get you through most of your meetings, and you also get the privacy shutter switch, which is a really thoughtful feature for folks who value privacy. Again, nothing new, it's been there with the 2023 model. Now, these front-facing speakers offer the same characteristics as the previous generation. I would say they do lack a bit of bass in comparison to the Blade 16 and the 18, since those laptops have additional drivers. The new G14 in comparison sounds way better than this laptop. There is more definition with the lower ends, the trebles are more sharper. Now Synapse does offer different audio profiles that you can play around with, including THX spatial audio, which honestly didn't make a huge difference other than a slight bass boost, but from a media entertainment standpoint, the G14 just completely destroys the Blade 14. Now, the display on the new Blade 14 hasn't changed all that much. You still get the same 16:9 aspect ratio with the high resolution Quad HD Plus panel at 240 Hz. It's also factory calibrated out of the box, so the color gamut is pretty solid, covering 100% sRGB, 86% Adobe RGB, and 98% P3. Razer's also implemented different color profiles within Synapse if you want a little bit more control from one application to another. Oddly, I did notice that the SDI performance on this year's Blade 14 isn't as impressive compared to last year's model. My sample was only able to achieve close to 490 nits. It's a bit of a downgrade in my opinion. But that being said, gaming performance is fantastic, though I will admit, I am a bit spoiled by the OLED's performance because the vibrancy just doesn't match the Blade 14. Plus, the glossy finish actually contributes to a sharper image, at least to my eyes. But obviously, the other trade-off is that this panel is way brighter compared to the OLED, because OLEDs generally don't tend to be as bright compared to an LCD panel. So yeah, things to watch out for. But yeah, OLED's starting to grow on me right now. Now, upgradability on the Blade 14, again, same layout compared to the 2023 model. So you get 2 RAM modules with maximum supported capacity up to 64 gigabytes, which is according to Razer, but they actually did hook us up with a 96 gigabyte memory module from Crucial, which I just simply popped in, and what do you know? This thing actually supports 96 gigabytes of memory, which I guess is pretty neat if you are considering massive amounts of memory in a 14-inch gaming laptop. It's definitely possible on the 14, whereas G14 definitely has some restrictions in that regard. But 96 gigs, that's crazy for all of your Chrome tabs. Just putting it out there. You also get a single M.2 SSD, and the drive speeds are pretty similar compared to its predecessor. So from a hardware perspective, the Ryzen 8000 series doesn't really offer anything new versus the previous generation. So Razer completely carried over the power modes from the 2023 model. That means the Ryzen 9 8945HS gets a decent amount of power in balance and boost modes. The CPU never really got to worrying temperature levels, which is, I guess, a good thing. The same thing can be said with the RTX 4070. It is amazing to see a thin and light gaming laptop, 14-inch to be more precise, with a GPU typically running over 100 watts. And that's a lot better than the Zephyrus G14. But it's not like this is unique, since last year the Blade 14 did the exact same thing, and even it had the same low temperatures. Now, one of the main problems I see is that AMD didn't make a single meaningful change between the 7000 and the 8000 series. And with Razer using the exact same battery capacity on the newer model, that ends up leading to identical battery life. It doesn't matter if it's in a light load test or something that puts in additional stress on the system. This is essentially a copy and paste job. So if you care about how much time you get away from a charger, well, save a few $100 or buy the 2023 version, or even better, just grab the new G14. But the Blade 14 has never really been known for its battery life, since the focus here is really on delivering the best performance in the most compact form factor possible. And that's exactly what it does. But as we go through these results, there's a few things that really do jump out. First of all, the 2023 and 2024 models get the same results regardless of the power modes being compared. I mean, sure, every now and then one jumps ahead of the other, but that comes down to run-to-run variance, sample differences, and margin of error. Comparisons also have to be made against the new ROG Zephyrus G14 because that's a much less expensive device, and yet it competes really well in CPU-focused tasks. Plus, let's not forget, it gets a completely new design, whereas Razer's just stuck to the same old one from last year, I guess even 2 years ago. One small hiccup we ran into was performance in lightly threaded workloads. For whatever reason, the Blade just couldn't even match its predecessor or the new G14. In CPU testing, this doesn't really matter, but it could have a directly negative impact on gaming, which we can see in CSGO, where the newer laptop ends up being consistently slower than last year's model. The rest of the results though, well, like I've been saying all along, they are pretty much literally a clone of the previous generation. There is no better or worse gaming performance, and certainly nothing to justify the premium Razer charges for their new model when it's equipped with the same old RTX 4070. That being said, the Blade 14's gaming performance highlights the G14's major issue as well. In order to cram an RTX 4070 into this thing, ASUS had to make some major sacrifices to the GPU power. So in the vast majority of games, the Blade actually ends up bleeding by at least 15%, or sometimes by a lot more if 1% lows are taken into account. Game testing at higher 1600p resolution doesn't show anything new either. The Blade 14 walks all over the G14, but it doesn't do anything to distinguish itself from the version that was launched more than a year ago. You see, I can't even blame Razer though. They're simply dealing with the hand they were dealt. Since the 2020 model was launched, NVIDIA hasn't launched a new GPU architecture. On the CPU side, AMD simply took their Ryzen 7000 series, rebranded it to the 8000 series, and sprinkled a bit of AI fairy dust onto it. So what they're left with is very little space to distinguish one Blade 14 generation from another. So here's the thing with the new Blade 14. I don't think you should buy it. I don't see myself or just anybody spending that kind of money to get the same level of performance as the previous generation. It perfectly lines up with what Mike said 4 months ago.
Even though AMD wants you to believe the 8000 series is that all new and great thing, it actually isn't.
You see, I really wanted to make this video to see if there was any difference in performance with the new 8000 series. If you're really keen on getting the best performance, maybe you should wait until Zen 5 next year, or Lunar Lake from Intel. Those are the only two options I see would probably give you something different, something better compared to what we have right now. I say that if you're chasing for the fastest performance on a 14-inch gaming laptop, get the older Blade 14 over the new G14 because the performance on that is going to be way better. But if you want something thinner, more compact, with maybe a better keyboard and something that looks kind of cool with a nice OLED screen, I would get the G14 because it's also a lot cheaper than the Blade series. So, you know, there are pros and cons to both. On that note, thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.